This is a Ramping Up Your English book review. If you want to go back in time to the very birth of trains and railroads, you want to read the book The History of Railways by Colin Heinsohn from Scholastic Books. The book's format reminds me of eyewitness books with small illustrations and ample text. English learners will find that the text is very challenging and there's a lot of text on each page. The illustrations are clear, providing the context to help readers decipher the text. Historical photos depict important events like the Golden Spike ceremony that joined the Union Pacific and the Central Pacific Railroads as America's first intercontinental railroad. There's a great amount of information in the history of railways. Readers will stretch their English reading skills, but you'll also be rewarded by a deeper knowledge of trains and railroads. Meanwhile, you'll be ramping up your English proficiency, especially in reading. For Ramping Up Your English, I'm John Letts. Welcome back to Ramping Up Your English. This is segment 3 of episode 3. In segment 1, we watched a video clip about the early days of railroads. These were times when trains were pulled by steam locomotives. Let's look at a science of steam, the steam power that made all of this possible. We'll start by seeing a brief video clip that shows a science experiment by some elementary school students. They're heating water in a test tube by using heat from a candle. Let's see how it works out.
This is the action-reaction lab. We've been working on a few labs in science and we decided to pick this one. The reason we call it the action-reaction lab is because the cork, when it pops off, the test tube lab will go back. And what you need to set it up is 2 chairs, some fishing line, tape, straws, Vaseline, the cork, and the test tube.
Okay, to set this lab up, you tie a string around one chair, and then you put the 2 straw pieces on the fishing line, and then you tie the string around another chair, and then you put the test tube up to the straws, and then you tape the test tube around the straws, and then you put the Vaseline on the cork and put it in.
And what we're trying to prove in this lab is Newton's third law, which is for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. And what should happen is when the water heats up, that'll create pressure and it'll make the cork pop off. And when the cork pops off, that should make the test tube just kind of ride right along the string. And we'll see if that works. Any second now.
Take the one.
And if you want to make it even safer, sometimes take 2 pieces of fishing line, and so if the fire burns through one, you still have another to hold the test tube up. You always want to make sure you have safety goggles, just in case the test tube explodes. And there we go. And the lab worked out just fine.
Prove one of Isaac Newton's laws of motion. We also got to see the power that's produced when water changes from a liquid state to a gas. That's what popped the cork off. It's that power of expanding steam that moves a locomotive and the train that it's pulling. Now let's look at the language of reporting a science experiment. Note that the first student listed all the materials needed for the experiment, and the second student told exactly how they set up the materials. While this may seem tedious, it's essential to clearly communicate how the experiment was conducted so that others can replicate the experiment. See, science is all about discovering and sharing knowledge and observing results that others can observe. Science has nothing to do with faith or belief. It's important that language be consistent with the nature of science when you're doing science work. The second student used sequencing to explain how to set up the experiment. He started the directions after saying, "To set this lab up, you..." Those words, plus his tone of voice, tells the viewer that he's about to give the first direction in a sequence. This is often done with words like first or initially. He introduced all the other steps with the words "and then." It's important to use this kind of language when sequencing. The word "then" is functioning as a joining word here, what we call a conjunction in English. Beyond the vocabulary of any subject, which you have started building in our trains unit, it's important to learn these function words in English. The word "and" was not necessary, and he probably would have just used the word "then" if he were writing the sequence. What he left out was the clue that the sequence was about to end. That's commonly done with the word "finally," as in, finally you put the cork in the test tube. These are basic sequencing words which are essential to listing things in specific order. There are some high-level sequencing words which we'll learn in subsequent lessons, but for today, be sure you're solid in using these basic sequencing words correctly. You'll probably hear them all the time, but you might not have thought that much about them. So our homework with this time is to think of multi-step processes that list the steps in order using the words first, then, and finally. If you know other sequencing words, be sure to use them as well. If you can't think of anything else, think of the steps in a recipe. The third student explained what they thought would happen when the water in the test tube boiled, as an experiment is usually done with the expectation of results. But the scientist must be honest about the results, whether they meet the expectation or not. It's such honest experimentation and careful observation that allowed scientists and then engineers to build steam engines. Those steam engines were important not only to the railroad, but to all aspects of the Industrial Revolution. A scientific approach is more important to our lives today than it ever was, so being able to understand and practice science using your target language of English is essential to elevating your English proficiency to a higher level. This wraps up segment 3 of episode 3 of Ramping Up Your English. You'll find more resources at our website, letscreate.org. You can also watch or download this program and others by going to archive.org/details/ROGUE-TV. I want to thank my technical crew for making this program possible. I also want to thank the helpful and encouraging staff at RVTV for their help, and I also want to thank you, our viewers, for watching. We'll be back for episode 4 of Ramping Up Your English. I'm John Letts.
You've been watching Ramping Up Your English, a support program for intermediate level English language learners. Learn more. Visit our website at letscreate.org. You can also watch or download today's program at archive.org/details/ROGUE-TV. Join us next time on RVTV Voices for Ramping Up Your English.